I think sorry about that. All right. I think we're going to get going for our last panel of the day. I'm really pleased to introduce these next two gentlemen who are good friends of mine. You are very, very gentlemanlike. Because this could be a really interesting conversation. And I'm very excited to hear. So, because the next session explores how the U.S. government has supported game initiatives, the past, the present, and is there a future? We hope so.
Right after that.
Yeah. From small business investments to research to policy shifts, we'll unpack what worked, what's changed, and what lies ahead. We have Mark DeLaura, Games and Education Technology Consultant at Level Up Games, hi Mark, and Paul Fisher, AI Advisor Manager at Accenture. Look forward to it. You can take it from here.
Switches are hard for me, I'm old now.
The Obama administration was too long ago.
Did you see all the wrinkles on that picture? They're all White House wrinkles. Yeah, this is going to be a punchy session, I think. But we heard it's recorded, so it'll be slightly toned down, but probably not enough. So hi. So I'm Mark DeLaura. I'm a 30-year games industry guy. I work for Sony and Nintendo and Google and some publishers. But was really honored to spend 2 years working in the Obama White House in 2013, 2014, focusing on mostly games for learning and computer science education for K-12. And then the last 10 years, I've been doing consulting work, kind of crossing entertainment with ed tech, so doing lots of games for kids. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'll do a quick intro too, and then I think in terms of our run of show, what we're thinking is sort of Mark will do a extended biography where I will interject with questions as the moderator of the Mark DeLaura fan club, and sort of like get you to elicit more about particularly your time in the White House. And then we'll try and save about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. What?
You skipped the part where I do that to you.
Oh yeah. Then you will ask me. Yeah. I'm Paul Fisher. My background is in international development. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I lived in Brazil for a while. I worked in Jordan before spending about 6 years at the State Department, first working on games for cultural heritage preservation and protection, and then later games for media literacy and countering disinformation. All right. And that came to an end, just to be clear, as of March 31st. A little foreshadowing there.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's such a small room that if you have a burning, driving question, you should put up your hand and we'll go that way. But what I'm going to do first is just kind of do a quick zip through a few slides. I think we'll probably do my slides and then questions, and then Paul will do his slides and we'll do questions. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of info about how games in government came about and what that means when I say that. Because usually what people think it means is tax rebates, but that's not what it's about. But if you want to have that conversation, we can do that too, because I'm very well practiced at that, and I have some information. Anyway, so what the heck, games in government? We were not the people who invented this idea. There was a gentleman named David Rajewski at the Wilson Center. The Wilson Center is a quasi-governmental institution. It's kind of half in, half out. It gets half of its funding from the administration and half of its funding it raises through philanthropy. Mostly it focuses on foreign policy. David Rajewski's question was, games are a really interesting form of media. What can we do with this? Are there ways that we can utilize this to increase engagement, teach people about things that are more complicated and interactivity will help, et cetera, et cetera. So he partnered up with Ben Sawyer, who's a longtime game industry guy, and wrote this paper in 2002, starting to explore this idea of serious games. So there followed 4 or 5 years of serious games summits at GDC. And a bunch of those talks are up on GDC Vault, if you're a GDC Vault member. But then the first real shot at a game from the US government was this game Budget Hero. So created inside of the Wilson Center. The idea was, can I make a game that helps people understand how hard it is to balance the federal budget, the kind of things you might need to do in order to do it. And we're gonna teach that to you by making you do it. So we're gonna give you the current budget, we're gonna give you a bunch of policy cards, and you get to choose which cards you wanna play, and then we'll roll forward time and see how you did. And the clever side hustle here was the information that the players chose was data mined to see if there was some correlation between receptivity towards particular budget or particular policies in real life. So the sugar tax is one example of that. One of these cards was, should we put like a 2% tax on sugary carbonated beverages? And that one got played a lot. And so that was a piece of data that then ended up getting sent over to Congress. FYI, sugar tax, maybe something to think about. Anyway, Budget Hero is great. It's hard to find now. You can find it on the Internet Archive, though. It's a Flash-based game, so it's a little hard to get it to work. The second one came out of NASA, Moonrise Alpha. If I remember correctly, it was an early version of Unreal, but the idea was to let you go to the moon. There was discussion about Moonbase Alpha at the time, and this let you go to the moon and do a few things that we were supposed to be able to do if we ever set that up. Just an educational game, but a very pretty educational game for the time. So that was 2008. I think my era started more as a result of this game and this paper, this is Fold It. So Fold It is a game about protein folding. Does anybody know what protein folding means? Nice. Oh, we got the smart audience in here. Awesome. Yeah, so complicated molecules fold in interesting ways. And the characteristics of that material are based on the way that it folds. So being able to predict the way that it folds is really interesting for us. Also really hard for us to figure out algorithmically, or if we have a material and we're trying to understand the shape of that protein, the way that we do it is we shoot X-rays at it and see which way they bounce. So for a simple material, that works great. For a complicated material, that works terrible, right? It's like it's an empty black box we're shooting stuff into, and we're just trying to guess based on where things fly out, what the shape of this thing is. So Fold It was a game where it taught players how to fold simple molecules as the first few levels, and increasing levels got increasingly complex. And players got really good at this. This is like a puzzle game, just like any puzzle game. But then somebody said, well, what if we gave these great players real materials and said, what do you think this one would fold like? And then we'll go check and see if you're right. So that was super interesting, and one of the things that they ended up giving to this group of players was an HIV-related enzyme. And the story goes that this had been 10 years of research into the shape of this enzyme, and in 10 days, 10,000 players worked on this problem and came up with solutions. And so this research paper, which I'm sure is hard to read, but you can pull off the internet, cites a bunch of these people as being contributors to the research, and it talks about this mechanism and how they did this for the first time. A government science research paper with 10,000 gamers listed in it. So that's pretty great. So what happened here was the administration saw this. Also, there's another game called Malaria Spot that had an interesting, I'll shorten that story, but you can look up Malaria Spot, had a kind of similar arc. Saw these two things and said, what else can games do? This is amazing. How do we do more of this? And who do we know who could do this? And so they didn't call me, they called Constance Steinkuhler, who's now at UC Irvine. And Constance is an academic. She, at the time, was at UW-Madison in Wisconsin and focused on the study of video games. So she came, and she was in the administration for about a year and really dug in on the academics behind games. So what can games do? How do we know that games can do this? The research behind game design, and put together formal committees of people to study this stuff. Great, but I think that Constance had a very young child, and that was a challenge, I think, to maintain a White House schedule. And that was lucky for me, because after a little while, when she expressed that she was going to go back to UW-Madison, they did a search, and they found me, and 8 months of security clearances later, I was in DC. So I got so lucky to be able to build off of Constance's work, but I focused more on she focused on the research, I focused on the creation of games themselves. So I was trying to find ways to get entertainment companies to make more games, trying to find ways to get agencies to build games, and try to get this guy to talk about games as much as I could. So wrote a speech about computer science at one point and got him to say, you should make games. And that was like a happy dance day for me. It's still on YouTube. We had kids who had made amazing games, amazing STEM-related games, come to the White House and show them off at the science fair. In the middle of that was this big meeting with current Vice President Biden and the video game industry talking about Sandy Hook. That was in 2013. That was not a super fun day. I'll skip those stories. We put together an interagency working group called the Federal Games Guild. These are just 6 of the members. Any agency that had people who thought maybe games could be used for something to forward their work, they would come to this interagency working group, and we would share information with each other and support each other and build games. We did a jam, big White House game jam in late 2014. 100 game developers, 25 teachers, lots of cupcakes, lots of sugar, not enough sleep, but built a whole bunch of prototypes over the course of a weekend. And then on Monday, everybody came in and showed off what they built in the White House, which was kind of nuts, but awesome. And then last slide I've got is so the Department of Education in particular was funding a bunch of learning game related work using the small business grants. Every agency that has a budget over a particular size has to spend 2.3% of that budget incentivizing small businesses in some way through this SBA, Small Business Innovation Resource. What's SBA? Small Business Agency? Yeah. Oh, sounds good anyway. Yeah. Administration. Thank you. So it's a partnership between like ED and SBA, NSF and SBA, NIH and SBA. Sorry, health, science, other agencies with big budgets. So ED is the Department of Education. So their big budget partnership with SBA, they would fund 6 or 7 learning games every year. And after doing that for a few years, they said, why don't we get together all of these people who were doing these games and invite local teachers in and students in and talk about what worked and what didn't. And so slowly this thing called the Ed Games Expo started to happen. And the 10th version of it, it was 150 games, a couple of thousand kids and teachers came in. It took place in the Kennedy Center, just this massive, massive celebration of what could be done with learning games. So other agencies have done that as well. NIH made games for health. NASA did some space-related games. A lot of the agencies used the small business grants, used with past tense, to fund this work. Okay. So that was most of my time, and I wrapped in end of 2014.
Okay. And so now I'm going to ask you a few questions
Okay.
to drill down on some of those pieces a little bit.
Okay.
Or maybe we need to move a little bit further apart.
Yes.
Okay, so right when you joined the administration, right, I would imagine you were probably the only person who had previously been in the industry, right? You talked about Nintendo, you talked about PlayStation. That's like a very different experience from sort of like the more traditional route that I followed, for instance. Like, what did that mean? What did that look like for you? How was that valued or challenged?
Well, there was a thing when you got into the White House and you meet new people, they always asked you one question, which is, where are you from? And what I didn't realize at first was that question was, what school did you go to? And they expected you to say Yale or Harvard. And I said, oh, I went to the University of Washington in Seattle. And they were like, who are you? Why are you here? So it was a little bit odd coming in. And then I think with specific respect to having worked at Sony and Nintendo, I have gray hair now, but at the time I thought anybody who doesn't have gray hair understands what I'm doing and why I'm here. Because it was around, like, people over 50 hadn't really grown up with games as much at the time. And so I would have conversations with, like, older people in Congress or division directors or something, and maybe they wouldn't get that games could be used for a thing just because they didn't live in that world. But people who were younger had grown up with games, and they could see that there was more potential there, and so we would have more interesting conversations. So I think that was my relationship with it.
Okay, and then you talked about sort of the change in job from Constance to you, right? Constance was doing much more of sort of like the science of games and how that could advance the scientific agenda of the administration. Yeah. You came in thinking about like how to incentivize more game making and studying of STEM. Yeah. Right, from my experience in government, you sort of get to build the ship that you want to build in some cases, where it's like, we don't really know what to do with a games person. Right. So like how much of your work there was sort of like a choose your own adventure of like you figuring out like these are the things that I can do and like slotting that into the demand signals from the administration versus like, here is a speech about STEM. You must get like your one line in there.
Yeah, that's a super insightful question from somebody who's been in government. Yeah, it was 100% choose your own adventure with zero budget. Ready? Go change the world. Yeah, so government is vast and spends a lot of money, but the Science and Technology Policy Office is not one of those groups that has a lot of money to spend. It's an influence organization. So your currency is influence. You're trying to find ways to do things. You're trying to find ways to tack those things onto other things. So for me, as a great example is this Department of Ed thing. Like, I really was interested in seeing more games for learning. Department of Ed is really interested in seeing learning interventions that are research-backed, things that provably work, that they can share out across schools around the country. Great. Let's make a game and do some research on it and see if that's one of those things. And if that works, I know you're going to scale it up. I'm going to get out of the way. And so trying to do that kind of thing was really the purpose of the interagency working group. It's just like, great, how can we scale this up? We're going to get you all in a room. If we find out games do something great, you're all going to find out too, and maybe that'll align with your particular agency missions, and you'll run. So the jam was one of those things that was not in that bucket. The jam was just something I really, really wanted to get done. And trying to find ways to take shots at something that were really inexpensive, make rapid prototypes of things. Government's not good at rapid prototypes. So figuring out a way to sort of get that into the zeitgeist of government was the purpose of the jam. And it was a huge success the day that we did it. We filled up the auditorium we were in with other people in the building who were like, who's the guy in the mohawk? And what is that crazy thing he built? It was great. So yeah, government is a vast and interesting place. And you can get a lot of work done or you can get no work done. Yeah. So we got some work done.
And so would you say that the Game Jam is sort of your biggest win? Like, what is the thing that you're most proud of then from your time in the administration, and thinking through like what did you see as sort of your legacy leaving OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy?
That's a great question coming from you, because I would say that it's probably the Federal Games Guild is the thing that had the lasting impact. Like the thing that I personally enjoyed the most was the jam, just because it was so unique for what government normally does. But setting up the FGG, Federal Games Guild, and then having the Wilson Center take it over and continue running it for the past 10 years, and continue working with people and agencies who found value in building games, that's the legacy of it. That's what the real value was long term. Most of that's dead now. But do you want to do your slides?
Sorry, not to bum people out today. All right, one last question from you, and then maybe we'll switch gears here.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did having Constance or you, or then Eric after you, like how do you think that there was an impact having somebody in the White House to speak and evangelize for games? Did that have an impact on the industry then? Because it seems like you're talking about industry having an impact on government, but did it go back the other way?
It did a bit, bits and pieces. I didn't mention Eric. So the arc of games in government kind of was during the Obama administration was when we were able to have the most impact. And it was Constance research, me development, and then Eric Martin came in. Eric really focused on players, and so he did some really interesting things with TikTok players. He did some MMO related stuff. Eric's amazing. As far as pushing back out, I think during that time there were some relationships with ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, and a few of the bigger publishers to take a shot at making games for learning through this thing called Glass Lab. You can look it up. It was based at Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts gave them the SimCity game engine, the newest version of SimCity at the time, and said, you can use this to make games for learning and assessment. That's what Glass is. And there was an investment from MacArthur Foundation, an investment from Gates Foundation, and then donations of space and material and time. And so they took a really strong shot at trying to make games for learning and assessment over the course of 3 or 4 years, and learned a lot and shared a lot. You can find those talks in Games for Change channel on YouTube. So I think the industry stepped up and tried to take a shot with us at this, but I'm not sure that there was a long-term lasting impact to the other entertainment companies at the time. I wish I could say that there was, but yeah. Over to you.
All right, so now we'll switch gears, and I'll give a little bit of the work that I was doing for the past 6 years with the State Department, and then Mark will ask me some questions. All right, let's see. Is it this way? Oh, okay, great. So my first job with state was on cultural heritage protection and preservation. And the State Department is one of the largest grant makers worldwide for supporting cultural heritage preservation and protection. And that comes very directly out of 9/11 and support for countering and preventing terrorism and violent extremism. So in 2020, at the beginning, before the pandemic, we were supporting an inventory of an archaeological site in Jordan. This is a site called Madaba. It's really spectacular. It's a Byzantine-era church that has this mosaic map of the Holy Land on the floor that pilgrims would have used in the 6th century to make pilgrimages to Jerusalem. So then the pandemic happened, and we were like, oh man, what are we gonna do? The US-based archaeological team can't go to Jordan to work with their counterparts. What are we going to do? So we trained a group of Jordanian kids, university students, in photogrammetry. And they went to the site and took tens of thousands of photographs of this archaeological site and created a digital twin. And we could have stopped there, right? From the State Department's perspective, the goal of this was to have an inventory so that if a bad actor came and chipped off an architectural element of this archaeological site and tried to traffic it on the black market, just by way of background, a major funding source for ISIS in the peak was looted antiquities. If that piece was recovered, you could point to the inventory and say, this thing came from this place. We know that it was there at this time. But instead, we put that online and overlaid that with audio tours from Jordanians in English and in Arabic talking about what this place means to their contemporary lives. And turned that basically into a point-and-click adventure. This photograph, sorry, I needed a different photograph in the slide. This is not it. This is a different project that I'll get to. But right, so we created this point-and-click adventure, and at the end of it, we were like, oh, we created a game. Oh, man, that was a great idea. But we didn't use the vernacular of games when we were talking about this at the time. And so that was sort of our first foray. And a lot of this was driven by the pandemic and sort of trying to figure out what the world of possible looks like. So that led to what we called the Cultural Heritage Game Jam. And that was a game jam that ran in late 2021. It ran for 3 weeks. Our implementer was Global Game Jam, and we had 900 participants from 72 countries who created 116 games, right, over the course of 3 weeks. Right, and as you know, with a game jam, you get some great games, you get some not so great games. This was the sort of standout game from that game jam. This is called Purun Machu. It depicts Chachapoya cultural heritage. This is an indigenous group in Peru, sort of less famous than the Inca. And they created this really vibrant, lush Amazonianscape with a beautiful soundscape on top. And you play a young woman who is not a bad person, but is motivated by economic desperation, right? She needs to feed her family. So she goes into the jungle to look for stuff to take. And so the first time that she encounters an object, let's see, what does it say there? Does it say pick up? Okay. That's a little bit later. I mean, the game takes like 5 minutes to play. The first object you take, it's like save. And then it's, rescue. And then eventually you get to pick up and then steal. And you go from sort of having, this I have to feed my family to a crisis of conscience. And, then you go on sort of this journey to return the final object. Beautiful game. And now that game is in a museum of Chachapoya cultural heritage in Peru. So we sort of saw this full life cycle. And in terms of the cost of that game jam, I think our total budget was far less than 100K. I don't remember what it was now. So that was sort of our first foray from State Department. First there was that Madaba Cultural Heritage Project, and then this game jam, and then Russia's invasion of Ukraine happened. What am I looking at? Oh, did I go the wrong way? Okay. Well, let's see. Okay, let's go here. So Russia invaded Ukraine in February 24th, 2022. And immediately we started getting demand signals to do something. So that led to the first United with Ukraine game jam. And let's see, we had 400 participants from, I want to say 25 countries who created maybe 100 or so games. But at that time, I was moving from an office that focused on cultural heritage preservation into an office that worked on countering propaganda and disinformation. Exclusively overseas, we did not deal with domestic issues. So this was purely overseas non-Americans. And so we continued to receive demand signals to support Ukraine. So I'm actually going to come back to this photo in a little bit, but I want to go here next. So at that time, there was a game called Harmony Square, which was paid for by the State Department. And it's grounded in the science of pre-bunking, which is the idea that I can intentionally expose you, the player, to a piece of propaganda and disinformation, but maybe about pineapple on pizza, or in the case of this game, a park for cats. So in this game, you are trying to spread conspiracy theories and disinformation about this outrageous public works project, a park for cats. It's just a debacle and a waste of money. So we know that this game and its predecessor game, Harmony Square, have a statistically significant impact on the abilities of players to discern between reliable and unreliable information after playing the game. Players are, I think it's 20% better at spotting disinformation after playing this game. Those games have been played, we're approaching about 1 million times combined. They're in over 20 languages. And as you can see here, sort of our innovation at the end of my time was localization. So moving from strictly translation into fully adapting the graphics of the game as well as the plot to better resonate in Latin America in the case of the middle character, and I think the character closest to me, she's speaking Amharic, so in sub-Saharan Africa, in Ethiopia in that case. So that was some of the work that we were doing. I'm gonna keep jumping back and forth here. This was a crazy game. This is, I think this is the game that I love the most. This game, it's called Safari ya Singida. It costs $25,000. It's played by dialing a toll-free number in Tanzania. So this game is exclusively available in Swahili. This is an instance where basically, in government, we were talking about demand signals for particular work. It's like, do something in Tanzania. So it's like, okay, well, if I wanted to use a game, how can I reach players in Tanzania? Well, there's this toll-free number for the whole country where you dial 1 to get information about weather, dial 2 to get information about banking, and we thought, well, why not 3 play a game? And so that's what we did. This is a choose-your-own-adventure game. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to play. You're on a bus trying to make it to your, family in time for a wedding, and basically people are trying to get you to get off the bus and steal your money throughout like these different adventures. And you can go down the wrong decision tree, and then the game will sort of like kick you back into the game loop and say, hey, maybe go this other way instead. But I know the devs, so they've been nice enough to continue to send me stats about the game, even though my time in government has come to an end, and it was played 20,000 times last month, right? So we are hitting our target audience, right? It's over 50% under the age of 32, right? And outside of Dar es Salaam, outside of the major city centers. So like this is like I think a win for us in terms of a game that is building resilience to propaganda and disinformation. All right, how are we doing on time? All right, let's jump back to this photo. Right, so I mentioned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and in government, the way it works is when there's a crisis around the world, Congress will hopefully, give you a bunch of money to figure it out. That's the way it works. So money, came to the State Department to support Ukraine, and that sort of goes through the filter and then until it came to my office. And so we had about $5 million for just the technology team that I sat on to support Ukraine. And people were just sort of looking around saying, who's got good ideas? And I said, well, I got a lot of crazy ideas. So we ended up issuing 5 grants for that total $5 million. We were building a game in Roblox, so a media literacy game in Roblox, to sort of like test this hypothesis of could you create a game that has this serious learning impact, but it's on Roblox. Like hopefully people will just want to play it because it's fun. That was our hope. So all of these projects, spoiler alert, were terminated by Doge March 4th at 2 a.m. The Doge Bros got into the grant system for the State Department and terminated 4,200 grants totaling over $4 billion in the middle of the night. We didn't actually know until we came into work the next morning and started to get emails from the grantees like, hey, did you see this? We're like, oh, and then, yeah, it was bad. So this project was our sort of sequel. Yes, Joel, I heard that. He was my boss, basically. The Doge person in charge of the State Department, his nom de guerre is Big Balls, very classy. We're a serious place. We only deal with global diplomacy. So we organized this sort of sequel to the United with Ukraine Game Jam. And it was a 2-2-2 model. So it was 2 days, then 2 weeks, and then it would have been 2 months. But we had to hit pause before 2 months because we knew that we would not be able to promise all the participants that there would be this big pot of money for them at the finish line to continue to develop their game. But all of the U.S. taxpayers could be very proud, I think, that we built this play testing center in Kropyvnytsky, Ukraine. So this was intended to be sort of a facility where at the end of the game jam, people could come and sort of like play test the games and measure their efficacy and continue to iterate on the games to make them better. So at least this place survives. And actually, it's a little bittersweet being here because we were all supposed to be in Krakow now for Digital Dragons, where we would have had a pitch competition for the final 8 or so games and $600,000 for follow-on money for the best game. And it said that didn't happen. So that was project 2 of 5. I'll be very quick. Let's see. The project that I think I was really intrigued by was an esports program. So in mid-23, somebody at the US Embassy in Kyiv said to me, so much of Ukraine has been bombed and mined that the future of play in Ukraine will be indoors. So we had to figure out, okay, like, are there activities that we can fund that make sense for our mission set, countering disinformation, that also can serve sort of this double function of creating safe places for play? So another incredible State Department project is called American Spaces. So these are community centers that are not sort of the fortresses. If you've ever lost your passport in a foreign country, needed to go to an embassy, this is not that. These are like some friendlier places with 3D printers, and they have maker spaces and computer labs. So we thought, okay, can we stand up esports teams across Ukraine at American spaces? So buying the equipment to furnish these places, because Ukrainian gamers and Russian players are playing the same games on the same servers, talking to one another and taunting one another. So could we create these places and incentives for kids to want to come and play at American spaces, to play their favorite video games, but equip them with the counter disinformation and conflict resolution skills so that when they encounter a Russian player, can they start the process of breaking through, to like engaging in a conversation grounded in game and play, but be trusted messengers to provide fact-based information about Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So that was the third project. And actually, maybe I'll stop it there. Yeah, so all these projects were terminated March 4th, and then I was terminated at the end of March. And that's my sad story. Yeah. Yeah, I still exist. I am real. And the photograph of the two of us will just sort of fade out like Back to the Future. Yeah, right. Sure. Okay. There were two other ones. One was a research grant to try and understand what threat actors are doing in game and game-adjacent chat. So basically, can we measure if there is Chinese or Russian or Iranian or terrorist actor propaganda being spread through Discord? That was an ambitious project that, of all of them, we were like, maybe they'll go for this one when the new administration came in, and it did not matter. And then the fifth grant, this was a great project. We called it synthetic media literacy. So basically, what are the media literacy skills that everyone is going to need now to navigate the internet safely, basically with a baseline, assumption that you are encountering generative content. So in Ukraine, Ukrainian 7th through 11th graders are already taking, Ukrainian language, history, culture, and the fourth one that I'm forgetting. And basically, we were going to build into these 4 courses synthetic media literacy. So what does the potential of Russian-generated content using AI look like in the context of Ukrainian language, history, culture, and heritage? And so we were going to do basically figuring out what those skills are, because we got to figure that out first, and then how to teach that. And we're going to have a massive training of trainers of about 1,000 Ukrainian educators. And then that would have, all of these projects had conferences built into them to really build a coalition. Because, I think something that we both can speak to is that the US government, because it has a lot of money basically, is the global leader in this. So we convened during the UN General Assembly this past September, a meeting of industry, governments, and civil society leaders to sort of spread the word about these projects and saying, hey, you should support us. You should do these things on your own as well. And we were having successes in terms of getting other governments to get in on these activities and to think about the influence that games have, right? Like, if I never have to write another memo talking about 3 billion gamers and how big the industry is in terms of revenue, I'll die a happy man. But at State Department, you can imagine, right? It's the adage "male, pale, and Yale" still holds pretty well. Maybe, I forgot that this is being recorded. But so you can imagine when you come into a room and you're like, "Hi, I'm Paul. I'm the video game guy." It's like, what? Why are you here? You want how much money? But you could eventually get to a place of convincing people that this is a thing worth paying attention to. And luckily now most of these diplomats have kids who are playing Fortnite or Roblox or Minecraft, which does a lot of work for us.
Hearing you talk about these things and the passion you had for them just makes my heart hurt that they were killed. But the thing that I keep coming back to is this gratitude for the way that you were able to use these games and games adjacent mechanisms as tools for government, just like any other tool. And I'm amazed by that. Also, how did you do that?
I mean, it really was, I think, an instance of right place, right time, right? If not for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there would not have been as much money to experiment around the edges with these sorts of things. Right, I mentioned the budgets for those other smaller games, right? The budget for Cat Park was, I think, $250,000. The budget for Safari Yes and Gita was $25,000, right? We're not talking about lots of money, so you're not really able to like dramatically change the landscape of what's going on or like how government is thinking about these things. But, you know, when a country invades another country and all of a sudden you have 5 million, it's like, oh, well, that's a very different sort of like calculus and an experiment that I could run. And, you know, at that point, you know, I'd been in the job for a long time and had built trust among sort of the people who would give me the green lights.
Yeah, that part really rings home with me. Why though did you want to use games in this way?
Interesting. You know, like I think so after that first game jam with the Chachapoya Cultural Heritage Game, part of that grant was bringing the devs who were from Peru, Sweden, and Iran to GDC. We were not able to bring the Iranian to GDC, but everyone else came. And like that was the first time where I'd been to, you know, an industry event. And, you know, I had played games when I was younger, but I'd sort of like put games aside to be a serious person. And then I was like, oh, this is so much better than what I was doing. This is so much more interesting. People are so passionate about what they're doing, right? And like, there's so many people who I think probably both of us met, and it's like, man, are you just miserable in your job all the time? Like, if I don't go to work to be unhappy. And so meeting people who are so full of joy and the passion and the like excitement that they brought to their work was so cool. And so then on the government side, right, like I think for many of you guys, right, when you encounter somebody from the government, it's probably a not very pleasant conversation. It's like, hi, I'm from the FBI, something naughty happened on your platform. And I get to show up and be like, hi, I really love games and I think they could make a really important impact. Because, you know, devs all over the world want what we have, right? They've got sort of, I think, the technical skills on lock, but they want the sort of like business piece of like how to start a studio and access to funding. Those are the questions that devs all over the world are trying to figure out. I was lucky enough to go to Africa Games Week and meet devs from all over sub-Saharan Africa with Susanna doing awesome work. And it's like, oh man, why is there nobody from a development agency here? Why is nobody from USAID here? Why? Like, are we stuck in like a mindset of Africa equals agriculture? Is that what's going on? Like, we need to be supporting digital creative economies because the growth potential is huge. I don't remember what your question was, but I answered the question I wanted to answer.
I like that answer. What would you recommend, so of people in this room, are any people in government at the moment related to government? No. People who are making games, entertainment-focused games. People who are making games, not entertainment-focused games, education, other things. Other people. What other interesting things? Okay, everybody else. What other interesting things do you do, just for context?
Safety.
Safety.
Yeah. We're together.
Yeah, I knew that. I was just didn't want you to be left out.
Talent agency that provides funding for video games and create projects out there. So.
Awesome. I don't know.
We've been trying to keep studios alive and working.
I like that. Other people who want to chime in? I've lost the hands. Nice. All right. So my question for you is, how do these people get involved in forwarding this work? Because it sounds like the work is on hold.
Yeah, yeah. So if we've covered the past and now we're in the present is bleak. The present is everything is on pause.
Yeah, but all these awesome people
Yeah,
are here. And they
right.
could-
So we have to figure out, like, in terms of building a present that we can agree on and a future that we want to aspire to. Yeah, I don't know how to get all these people involved.
Come to Games for Change.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, I
that's
mean,
a start.
who better to champion Games to Change than Susanna?
Yes, hi, come to Games for Change.
Bring it to LA.
Yeah, I know. We need to bring it out to different places. But yes, so Mark and Paul are big parts of our community at Games for Change. Cat Park won Game of the Year. Civics Games, best Civics Game 22. Yeah. But it is a community of people who are from the games industry, from the humanitarian sector, academia, government, foundations, research. All are coming together because they believe games can make the world a better place. Like, that's the common thread. These are people who are gonna, we bring together, want to brainstorm new ideas, get inspired, forge new partnerships. There's so many great things that have come out of this, like mismatch. Well, I won't say mix match, but like this mashing of these different sectors together, and it's super cool. A lot of UN agencies also attend. So it's interesting. The Federal Games Guild work, that like model that you put together. I'm trying to get the UN to acknowledge it too, because at almost every UN agency I talk to, there's a games lead. Not that they're funding games in the same way that the federal agency is funding, but they have acknowledged that games have this, one pathway to over 3 billion players to reach audiences, engage in content, and they actually use it for fundraising. Right, this concept of like micro donations through players who are playing games. But anyway, like that's a whole other sector, that wasn't engaged in this space, and like to think that all of us are playing a small role in that. Anyway, I'll give it back to you. But we only have like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I only have one other thing. I think I'm taking up all the time asking questions. But I was curious if you knew of other efforts that are out there from other governments or that you could share with that give us hope and excite us about the future.
Yeah. Our sort of other peer government that was doing, I think, the most exciting work was the Swedish government. They have a great agency called the Psychological Defense Agency. And it's about building cognitive resilience to propaganda and disinformation, right? So this is like, a Nordic country that has been investing in media literacy for, from childhood to then upper education. So they released a paper sort of documenting and highlighting what they thought were the threat vulnerabilities from threat actors who could be exploiting games. So, right, if you've played, nobody has played it, hopefully, in this room. Don't raise your hand if you've played Everyone Hit the Traitors, in which you beat up Hong Kong protesters, or Smash the Nazis, which is a Fruit Ninja ripoff, in which you slice blue and yellow SS helmets, or Putin versus Furries, in which you play Putin murdering LGBTQ people. These are really terrible games that if you're playing these games, I'm like, okay, well, you're so far down the rabbit hole, I'm less worried about you. It's like, is there a threat of more pernicious propaganda seeping into mainstream games where you don't necessarily realize that you are playing a piece of propaganda? Because the games that we developed, they were very intentionally not about a hot button topic or a real world topic, right? It was about pineapple on pizza or a park for cats, right? We do not want to be in the position of being the arbiters of truth. We want to be empowering people with the media literacy skills to make those determinations for themselves. So the Swedes are doing great work. Do we want to turn to audience Q&A? Yeah. All right, 10 minutes. Brandy.
So,
I'll run this around.
okay. Yes, you can just keep that. There we go. So, an interesting point you brought up, you were saying, like, why don't we fund helping people in Africa, for example, to build up their industry? So, the irony that it feels that way is that so many people keep saying every country except the U.S. has grants and funds for their own country's developers, except the US. But here you're talking about the US then funding the growth of developers in other countries. So like, as you know, I tried. It's really hard for the small businesses in this country that want to be game developers working through governments to get those grants because you have to work with a nonprofit or an. Why don't we do that? Why don't we fund our own people?
Do you want to start? Well, okay. Let's start with SBIR, I guess, and sing the praises of Ed Metz. If any of you have ever met Ed, he is a prince. Ed from Ed, he was at the Department of Education for over a decade, and he ran the Small Business Innovation Research grant program, which you described, right? They issued, tens of millions of dollars in ed tech grants over the course of that decade. Many, many games were funded through that process, right? I mean, like, that's sort of, I think, one of the really unsung stories of the federal government support for serious games. I'll let you maybe opine on why there's not support for, like, commercial games. I have my own thoughts, but they're not popular.
What makes you think mine are popular? Well, I think we can look at many other countries and regions and see investments happening. A lot of times through tax credits, R&D credits. I'm always, if you've ever been to Gamescom and you could walk the floor and see all these regional booths where, here's the Polish game developers and they're there, they've incentivized the developers, they've brought them to the conference, they've given them marketing, they've given them tax credits. I'm like, why can't I do that here? Well, we just can't if it's not where we're at. This would be funding that would have to come from somebody, taken from somebody. It's just a conversation that is hard to have at a national level yet, right? But, for example, film credits. That's a thing, right? So why are we not trying to get game credits to look like film credits? I think that's a conversation we can have. And you can see right now there's this really interesting conversation in California around film credits. So maybe there's an opportunity there. It seems like at a state level, this is something we can do. In Washington State, we recently propped up this thing called the Washington Interactive Learning Alliance, which is going to have a little bit of money to do something interesting around learning games, state supported. Our Secretary of State is like a board game fan and bringing game developers to game conferences. Like, okay, so at a more local level, I think we're going to see more movement here.
I think New York State is also offering,
Good
credits.
example, yeah.
I know. Not the city. I mean, the city has its own thing, but New York State. Here you go.
This is actually just building on that last question, because I've always gotten asked, like, what about lobbyists out there? Like, I mean, obviously you see them for everything else, right? But then I just recently went to DC and I brought up the question, like, where are game lobbyists? Do you have history with that? The ESA does exist, but, like, can you walk me through quickly, like, what does that look like?
I think the ESA is amazing. That when I was in DC working with Entertainment Software Association was super fantastic. But when I left DC, I felt like I didn't have much. Like, you don't see them at the local level, you see them operating at the national level. I don't think that they're focused on, tax grants and deductions and things like that. Yeah, go.
I'm Pat Vance from the ESRB, so we're part of ESA technically. ESA has a whole state lobbying team. They are very, very active at the moment because there's so much state legislature going on a whole host of issues that are impacting the video game industry. They also hire and retain a whole host of other lobbyists, consultants, that they call consultants. But these are lobbyists across the country, not in every state, but a lot of lobbyists, and there's an annual meeting where all these consultants come in and we talk about policy. There's a lot going on. Getting back to the tax issue, it's actually not credits, it's actually tax credits. And these are pitched in a lot of states, and it's gotten a lot of traction in some states, not so much in others, but those states that are very proactive on the film side are definitely targets for ESA lobbyists to try to do the same thing for the game industry, but it's in the form of tax credits. It's not like they're not grants, right? So they're for companies who want to go into a local jurisdiction and build a studio. And the argument for the game industry in the past has been really good because these are permanent jobs. They're not just films that come in and shoot on location and then leave, and all the people leave. But they're actually, you know, building a studio in a local market provides, you know, permanent jobs. So, well, we know the industry. So true. Anyway,
Cool
sorry.
back, dude. No,
I just wanted
great.
to
I appreciate
correct
that.
it for the record.
No, I'm all for truth. One more question. I just want to say, if you're looking for a great model for games, it seems like Quebec did an amazing job building up the community in Montreal over the course of a couple decades. So, Canada in general.
I did also want to say that the state of Louisiana has a wonderful tax credit for gaming, as well as they have a beautiful ecosystem for small indie studios. So I highly recommend looking into the state of Louisiana. We are currently doing so as well. I know this is a little propaganda-y with what I'm saying. And I love what you said of, unfortunately, the pale Yale male. In the current, with the current administration and what we are looking to do just with the future of technology as well as with where we want to be in the world, do you see us taking 4 steps back instead of 8 steps forward due to the fact that we have people on the administration saying that those who are playing video games are lazy and need to get a job, instead of seeing it as an educational tool? I know it's a little propaganda. I'm curious.
Like, if it was not clear, I think, you know, the moment that we are in now is a moment of regression in terms of federal support for games. You know, so much of the institutional knowledge of folks like myself at State Department, the Woodrow Wilson Center that ran the Federal Games Guild, Ed from Ed, so many good people are gone. You know, they've been doged, they've been terminated, they're leaving of their own volition. It's a really grim time right now. Right? Like, there is no, at least when I left, you know, and I don't think much has changed in a month and a half. We were not receiving policy guidance about what to do. If you don't have policy guidance, right, nobody's going to stick their neck out to take a risk on what they think the administration wants to do. So the reality is that nothing is happening, except for the things that you read about in the news. But, you know, in terms of the things, the sort of steady state, the grant making, you know, there was an incredible talk by Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State. And she was talking at Stanford about sort of the ecosystem, right, between government, academia, and industry. So the MRI machine is a perfect example. The MRI machine was funded with research in the 40s. The MRI was not invented until the 70s, right? And then you're able to commercialize that, and people are able to get this access to life-saving machine, right? There's so many examples like that of this sort of this cycle of the government making big bets, right? Bets that the private sector cannot and will not make because the pipeline is 30 years down the road. But like, that is the role of government, to think about challenges around the bend and to fund research, right, to solve for market failures. And unfortunately, that's not happening. We wanted to get in this talk, but we're running out of time here, to the like future we wanted to build, or like the future that we could all hopefully imagine together. You know, I don't know if we think like federal tax credits are a thing that might happen. I would love to see, you know, federal support for devs in emerging markets as from a foreign policy perspective. But I don't know if you want to talk about domestic policy.
Yeah, no, for me, my wrap on all this is really just like what you said. I feel like it's a dark time. But what I do know is when we've had dark times before, it does inspire a lot of people to suit up, right? We may not know how to get involved. We may not think we're the right person to do it. But we might just be driven to try something that you wouldn't have tried normally. And that's what I want to encourage you to do, as long as you feel safe doing it. Plug in with people at the ESA. Plug in with your local legislators. Talk to local nonprofits that you're involved with already. Make games on your own. Find ways to hold a game jam and have kids brainstorm about the future and make something interesting to share. There's all sorts of ways that we can all get involved. It just doesn't look like in the short term there's going to be a whole lot of federal support for it. But maybe among us, we can have 1,000 flowers bloom.
Nice metaphor. All right, well, Mark and Paul, thank you for that really interesting and often tragically funny presentation. Of course, there'll be a positive future, and games will prevail. In what form within the government, we'll see, right? We'll just see. But I want to thank you and thank you all for joining us for our last session. It is time now to, where's a clicker? Do you have it? Oh, yeah. Time now to head on over to the cocktail reception, which